Welcome to the Performance Formula with JODY Martins. LIZA, officially welcome to the Performance Formula podcast. It is really, really awesome having you here.
I am really excited to speak with you. It's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into a whole bunch of things. And like I said to you just before we started recording, I've never had somebody from your field, nutrition, on the podcast. So I'm really looking forward to to learning from you how sort of nutrition and what we eat and how we go about that, how that affects performance and our lives at the end of the day.
100%. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it, because I mean, everybody has to eat, right? Like you can, some people choose not to exercise, some people choose to go into endurance sports and others into strength sports or team sports or whatever, or but in the end we all have to eat. So I hope I can bring some value to your listeners.
Yeah, with everything that you've experienced in your field, right, with all the highs and the lows and the ins and the outs or whatever it might be, what do you think are some of the most important things we can learn from you in this conversation, and how would we best learn that?
Well, I think if we think about food a little bit in the sense of it can either help us perform better in whatever area of life, whether it's at work or physically, or it's going to make things worse. So every action that we take or everything we put into our mouth is going to either benefit or kind of hurt ourselves. And by that, I don't mean to fearmonger and be like, oh, no, you can never have a brownie, you can never drink alcohol or whatever. No, of course, it comes down to the things we do most of the time. 80-90% of the time, right? So I'm very much into moderation and keeping the balance. I'm not someone to say like someone needs to be vegan or keto or whatever. No, I don't want people to take that away. But I do think if we think more about, okay, every action that we take, everything we eat can be a vote for the future person we want to become. I think that can shift a lot and can help us make better decisions on a regular basis.
Yeah, I like that. I like that thinking that it's like every time you eat, it's part of designing who you're going to be in the future, you know?
Yeah,
I
and
don't
I
think
think
we always think about it like that, especially if you think of somebody. I've done it, and I'm sure many other people do at times. A little bit of emotional eating. You feel a bit down. You go, oh, geez, if I eat that thing now, that's a bit oily, and it's not sort of what I would normally eat. But if I eat that, I might feel a bit better. You know?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, like, essentially, we all tend to engage in emotional eating from time to time because we are prone to stress, or like it's just such an easy way to shift our emotion short term. And nowadays, with like, instant gratification, which is possible with the DoorDash and just everything being so available, we all have that inclination. But if we remind ourselves of that, like, okay, everything that I do, um, we logically know it is just harder to implement. And so, on that front, when it comes to the implementation side, I personally like to guide people towards thinking more of, okay, what should I have more of? And not thinking so much on the what should I have less of? Because if we eat more vegetables, if we eat more lean protein, we're gonna probably eat less of the processed stuff. We're gonna eat less of the just high carbs, high fat meals. And so just thinking about how can I include some fruit or vegetables into each one of my meals, and having that first, because then we're going to be more satiated and not craving those more processed things so much. And so quite often I hear, Lisa, I have a sweet tooth. What should I do about that? I really, really crave sweets. And I'm the last person to say, you need to keep that out of the house. You can never have your chocolate or whatever it might be. But I do say, okay, let's see. In that instance, think about, have you had your water, or like just drink a glass of water and then sit with that feeling. Maybe 5 minutes later, you're realizing you're not actually craving anything anymore. Are you just eating out of boredom? Because if that's the case, maybe go for a walk around the block, call your best friend, or do something and then see, are you still craving this? Have you had a stressful day? To your point, exactly. Like maybe you can do a 3-minute meditation, just do a little bit of breath work, calming yourself down, and that's already helping your nervous system. And then on the same in the same line, also, like, what have you had to eat today? Because sometimes those quote unquote cravings come into existence because you haven't really sat down today and eaten a proper meal. You were like, okay, your coffee in the morning and then something really quick on the go and then grabbing a bite here and there. No wonder your cravings are super high. You haven't actually nourished your body yet. So let's have a proper meal with some vegetables and some protein first. And then let it sit for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If you're still craving your chocolate, please go have chocolate, but eat it in a way where you're like actually mindfully enjoying it and not while you're scrolling on your phone while watching TV and having a conversation and then realizing half of the block of chocolate is gone. So I just like people to think about everything that they do a little bit more mindfully, and everything nowadays is so fast paced. Like we often see, and I've done it too, I'll totally admit, but we see people in the car while they're having a phone call, while they're, like eating something from the drive-through. And I'm just thinking to myself, your body doesn't even have the chance to digest that properly and to recognize or realize that it has had food coming in, right? Whereas if you maybe park up, sit down on a park bench, eat your meal, and like consciously less multitasking at the same time, you're actually putting your body into more of a rest and digest nervous system state, and you can then process your food a lot better. And I mean, to your point here, if a lot of the people listening are into optimizing their performance, are into optimizing and whatever they're doing, whether it's through work or performance in a sport. And we want to make sure that we're digesting and absorbing our food properly so that our body can actually put that to best use, also through a proper blood sugar regulation and not just kind of like that sitting in our stomach and then we're having to exercise in a bloated way, or like it falling asleep half an hour later because it was such an insulin spike. So yeah, everything that we're putting in our mouth can literally, just change how you're feeling an hour, not just an hour, but 3-4 hours later, and how well you're performing cognitively and physiologically as well.
Would you say, as you're speaking, my mind sort of drifting into a couple of directions and sort of, thinking of things that I can ask you, right? And that I'm curious about, really wanting to know. So personally, most probably for the last 10 years, I've chosen to be vegan. Um, Coming from South Africa, that's like a really, really,
The nation
really
of the
different thing.
bride, barbecue.
Yeah, the braai and the meat. That's how we get raised. I always joke with people. I say, if you ask some South Africans if they eat vegetables, they'll say, "Yeah, I eat chicken." It's very, it's a very meat heavy society. And so my wife and I decided about 10 years ago, mainly for health reasons, to go vegan. And one of the things I often wonder about is, there's so many theories out there on and it's not just vegan, it's keto, and it's, I can't remember the names of all of these things, right? All of these sort of fads that tend to come and go. I'm wondering if you could maybe just shine a light on like what is actually healthy eating, right? And I mean, we don't initially have to talk specifically about being vegan, but these other diets, what are sort of things that should be mindful of and be aware of, right? From, say, a performance point of view. So, like, what is actually just healthy in terms of generalization across human beings? And then what should we be mindful of when we think of other diets and when we engage with them?
Love the question. And I do want to add that I also have some vegan clients. I do also have people that are more meat based and so on. So for me, it's totally a personal choice what someone chooses to eat. In the end, for me, like I'm in the quote unquote business of, or what I want to achieve is I want to help people lose body fat, gain muscle, help their body recomposition to a lower body fat or a healthy body fat percentage. And also very importantly improve their relationship with food. So that's kind of like my mission, because I too have struggled through various diets. I mean, yours is not a diet, yours is a lifestyle and a choice, and I love it absolutely. And I, on the other hand, I was doing all these kind of like paleo and then low carb and low fat, and for me it was just like a means to the end, not something that I would actually enjoy. And I just thought that that was a strategy to get me to look the way that I wanted to look. And then I learned that, hey, in essence, weight and physiological manipulation comes down to calorie and energy balance. So, we need to eat less than what we're burning if we want to lose weight, and we need to eat more than what we're burning if we want to put on muscle or weight in general. And so once I kind of like understood that there's actually like a logic behind this and it's not just a wild guessing game, and I realized that also by including the right distribution of protein, carbs, and fats, we cannot just manipulate if we're losing weight, but also if we're losing fat or muscle mass. And I mean, that's really, really important, because no one here wants to look skinny fat, I would assume, and also for health reasons, that people want to look lean and defined and healthy and feel vital as well. And so once I realized that, I noticed that we can actually, this is a huge advantage, because we can totally play it into how we're feeling best. If someone enjoys eating more fats and lower carbs, totally fine. Again, it comes down to the total calories, and we just need to make sure protein is in place and fiber is in place. If someone is enjoying a vegan lifestyle, also for because it allows them to feel best and for ethical reasons or so, absolutely fine, we can work with that as well. But to bring it back to your question, regardless of what we're doing, and on that note, like one of my favorite quotes, all in all, and this applies not just to nutrition, but generally speaking, one of my favorite quotes is, methods are many, principles are few. Methods change often, principles never do. So the principle overarchingly when we're talking about weight loss is calories in, calories out is the main driver. I'm not saying hormones and other things don't play a role. No, but this is the main driver. So whatever we're doing, if we're using intermittent fasting, if we're cutting out fats, if we're cutting out carbs or so, it still needs to lead to a lower calorie consumption if we wanted to elicit weight loss. So that's kind of like the principle that doesn't change, but the method varies, right? So nonetheless, to actually answer your question now, in my opinion, healthy eating means, for on average, mostly eating whole foods. And by that, I don't mean the store whole foods. I mean mostly unprocessed foods or minimally processed foods. So things that have few or single ingredients when you're purchasing them, or that don't even come in a package. So let's just say things like a potato or things like broccoli, that doesn't have anything else on the label. If it comes on with a label, it's literally just that. Or fish, or even dairy. If we're thinking of a high quality yogurt, or coconut yogurt or something, it might have like 2-3 ingredients with the added probiotics, or not added, the enzymes in there. But aside from that, it doesn't say sugar and 30 other things that you can't pronounce and don't even know what it is, right? So that's kind of, I think, a good guideline for anyone out there, if we're thinking about how can I improve my food. And once again, I don't think we need to be overly focused on, I can only eat clean, because I have done that too, where I felt so guilty about eating anything processed that the guilt was actually worse than the food itself, right? And that's no good either, if we're from a mindset perspective ruining something beautiful that we're actually eating. But generally speaking, if people consume less processed things, more whole foods, they're going to make improvements to their diet, because automatically they're consuming more micronutrients, so more vitamins, more minerals. And just in general, there is even something about the whole your gut needing to process the food more that allows us to burn more energy in the processing of that food than if we're eating something that's already super processed. So let's just say, if we picture a slice of white bread, if you picture that in your hand and you squash it, you can probably condense it to like this teeny tiny little ball. And I mean, that's what ends up in your stomach. It's not going to take a whole lot of time to be processed. If you think of the same amount of calories, for instance, 100 calories or something like that from a potato. That's a nice round big potato, or let's add some vegetables, some greens in there too. Your body is going to need a lot more time and a lot more calories to burn that, to process that, than the tiny little ball of bread there. So there's actually studies showing that if you expose people or two groups to first any kind of, or any amount of food that they like from processed foods, and then any amount of food that they want from whole foods, and then you switch the groups, on average both groups eat 500 calories more, simply because the processed foods also tend to be more palatable, and that means it tastes better. It's literally engineered by food manufacturers for you to think like, oh, this is amazing. That combination of salt, sugar, and whatever else they're adding to that, oils and so on, is just eliciting something in your body where you want to eat more of it. And natural foods don't have that in that sense.
So when things taste good, they might not always be good.
Yes, and that doesn't mean that healthy eating needs to taste bland. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I do think that our taste buds sometimes need a little bit of adapting to a little bit more of a quote unquote bland taste. So you can't expect that if you are currently, having your coffee with whipped cream and 5 sugars, and the next day you're expecting your Americano with nothing in it to taste the same and to get the same joy from that. That's very unrealistic. Maybe the first week just skip the whipped cream, and maybe then 3 weeks later reduce it to 2 sugars, and then another 3 weeks later reduce it to 1 sugar, and just wean yourself off. And you'll be surprised your taste buds do adapt, but not from one day to the next.
I've actually personally experienced that. As a child growing up, there were certain vegetables I just couldn't eat. In particular, there's still a couple of vegetables that I don't really like or enjoy eating it. Like asparagus or Brussels sprouts. They definitely not my favorite. And I'm sure they're not a lot of people's favorite that but something like mushrooms as a child, I could not eat
Interesting.
all. My mom used to grind it up into like almost like a powder and put it in. And if as soon as I had that taste, I would push the plate over the table and just say, I'm not eating this. Where I have found that since we've gone vegan, I can eat mushroom. I still
Yeah.
have a bit of a tolerance for it, but it doesn't taste, the taste is a completely different experience. And so I'm always fascinated by the idea where people, if I tell them that we sort of went vegan, they always say to me like, oh, I would never be able to do that. Like it's amazing how people believe that they can't do things
Well,
at
and I
times.
think there's like two parts to that. First of all, you say you've been vegan for 10 years. So I love it because you're like literally you've adapted it as a lifestyle, and I'm sure it's part of your identity as well. Like your friends know you as, hey, this is Jody, he's vegan, and that's part of who he is. And I think that plays such a big role in any kind of habit change or any kind of pursuit that we have. If we're adapting the identity already, like I'm becoming the fit person, I am successful in my business or whatever pursuit you're having. This is who you are, and then you're going to step into that person, even if you're not that person yet. Whereas if you're already saying, like, if someone just in that verbiage that you used, oh, I could never do that, they are not even trying. Whereas if they were like, okay, I need to do that, or I know this is good for my health, this is what I'm doing, this is who I am, then they could much more easily adapt to that. And the other part to that being that a long time frame, like sometimes people quote unquote try something and they're like after 3 days, oh, it didn't work for me. And you're like, okay, 3 days is not a whole lot of time to change or achieve anything, right? Give yourself like 2 months, and then you can realistically say, I gave it a good go and my digestion didn't feel good on this approach. I'm going to try something different. But yeah, like most people that I know that say like it didn't work for me or that doesn't work for me, they're not actually putting in full effort. I do want to add a couple of things to your question about like what's a healthy diet. And so the foundation being more whole foods. And the other thing I already kind of alluded to is that with most diet approaches or just in our general quote unquote normal eating, which, if we're looking at the word normal, in my opinion, that almost never is a good thing, because if we're looking at the normal person, they're overweight, they're prone to disease, they probably need to go into some kind of care from the age that they're 65 or 70 onwards. And if you're asking me, that's not something I aspired to be. And I would say most of your listeners probably also don't. So that already implies we cannot eat in a normal way. We cannot do what most people do, in the sense of drinking 2-3 times per week and expect to live an extraordinary life while doing normal things. So we need to do extraordinary things as well. And most of the time, if we're just looking at the normal diet world, in our Western world, unfortunately, it is not just high in processed foods, but also very easy to just come by carbs and fats and very little protein. And so I do always want to encourage people also to base their foods more, or their meals more, around protein. I'm not saying like, 500 grams of protein per day, but just making you do have to go a little bit out of your way to include protein in your diet. And I'm sure you, as a vegan, you know that you need to include your tofu, your seitan, maybe a protein shake here and there, and maybe just combining good vegan or plant-based protein sources with some beans and quinoa, and like getting your protein that way. Because if you can also be an unhealthy vegan and just eat pasta and bread all day, and that's not the point of it. You want to be a plant-based vegan who's still getting their micronutrients, who's also still getting the right amount of protein. So I just want to say, like, on any diet that we're following, also if you're doing keto or so, you could just eat fat all day long, but not coming by getting a healthy protein source. So any dietary approach can be done correctly or incorrectly, and we just need to make sure that we're covering our bases. So what I usually recommend for people, no matter what dietary approach they want to do, is first of all, figure out what are your actual calorie requirements, regardless of whether you want to maintain your weight, lose weight, or put on some muscle. And so figuring out, instead of just dipping in the blind, like, oh, okay, is this too much? Is this not enough? I don't know. There's a lot of calorie calculators online. I will say most of them don't give out accurate numbers, obviously. They don't know how many diets you have done in the past. They don't know what your hormone levels are or so, but they're always going to ask for your height, a general activity level, your age if you're female or male, and then give you like a rough idea. And I would say that can be a good starting place, just to like um, gauge roughly if that's working for you or not. So there's also a lot of dietary food logs, or like food trackers that you can get for free these days, MyFitnessPal, Chronometer, whatever it might be. And I would just recommend tracking what you're currently eating, so weighing your food and recording that in there for a couple of weeks, for several reasons. I'm not saying that that needs to be something you do all the time, and I often get the pushback, oh, that's so tedious, I don't want to weigh out everything that I'm eating. Well, first of all, it's going to speed up. You're going to get better at that. Second of all, the learning that you get from that is huge, because sometimes we hear, peanut butter is a great protein source. And then you weigh it out and you realize a tablespoon has like 150 calories, but only gives you like 3 grams of protein. So that's, in my opinion, is not a great protein source. If you compare the same amount of calories from seitan, and you get 30 grams of protein or something like that, off the top of my head, right? So you're literally just going to learn what is actually high in calories, what's actually lower in calories. So depending on your goal, you can choose your foods a little bit better. And you can then also learn, okay, how much of a portion should I actually have? When I, for the first time, weighed out my peanut butter that I'd usually have on my morning oats, I was like, oh, wow, no wonder I'm not losing any weight. That's like a quarter of my daily calories right there, just in peanut butter. Shoot, I need to be a little bit more mindful. And so, because I had that mindset of like, or that attitude of like, oh, why am I not looking the way that I want to look, or why don't I look like I work out? I'm eating so healthy. That's kind of like where I was coming from. And a lot of the people that we start working with, they have that same problem where they're like, I work out, I eat well, why don't I look like it? This is frustrating. I put so much work into it. And then just realizing that, okay, you might eat well, but first of all, what does that even mean? And second of all, it can still be really high in calories. Like I would, for instance, have I don't know, like 3 eggs or something like that, and salmon and a bunch of veggies, and then drizzle half a cup of olive oil and some seeds on top of that. Yeah, that's all super healthy, but that meal came to like 1,000 calories because it's all high in fats, and nothing wrong with that, but we can just tweak the quantities, maybe add a little bit more greens to that, and you've got half the calories there. So what the food recording is going to do for you, just to sum that up again, is give you a better idea of your portion sizes and give you an insight into what kind of macros are actually in your foods, especially as a vegan, can be really, really helpful because it's hard to say how much protein is in certain things if you're just like combining things here and there. And I think in the long run, that can be really beneficial for people to know how to like tweak their own calorie intake depending on what goal they have at that moment.
Yeah, sure. I'm listening to you speak, and I'm sort of understanding in my own way. I'm sort of thinking, yeah, there's quite a lot to this, right? There's quite a lot to nutrition. We tend to wake up and you eat that breakfast because your mom used to make that breakfast for you. You eat that lunch because maybe you feel like eating it, and there's not necessarily a lot of thought that goes into it. Yeah, I mean, if I think of sort of other conversations I've had on the podcast with people from other spheres of life, it seems like if we're thinking about optimizing ourselves in any way, shape, or form, right? There's a lot of sort of principles that overlap. So something like being mindful, right? Being mindful in your training, being mindful in your nutrition, being mindful, like being aware of what you're actually putting in your body and what the effect of that is.
Yeah, and I think with
Knowing what your goal is to start with, right? Instead of just eating and eating and eating and going, oh, shucks, I'm ending up in somewhere and I don't even know why, you know? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a like another overarching theme for everything. We can't change something that we're not aware of. And so like we need to like a lot of the people I'm assuming who are listening to this are probably also generally fans of data when it comes to their performance. Maybe they're tracking their sleep, maybe they're tracking how fast they run, maybe they're tracking things in business and so on. And so why don't we track some of that in terms of our food as well? We're probably not shy of tracking our weight, but why don't we have more awareness of like what's actually going into our body in terms of the quantity? I often like to refer to calories kind of like a budget when it comes to saving as well. So if someone says, "Oh, I want to save money," your financial advisor is probably also going to say, "Okay, cool. How much? Like, are we talking $1? Or are we talking about $10,000 here?" We need to kind of gauge that, and that would be the equivalent to, okay, you want to lose weight? Well, how much? And then seeing what's realistic. And so your calories that you have on a daily basis is no different than having financial budget also. So let's just say if you don't necessarily want to lose weight and you're a larger individual, you have a lot of muscle, you're very athletic and so on, you're probably going to have more calories to burn. So it's no problem for you to have larger meals, to have more ice cream and so on. Whereas if we have a small female of not even 5 feet tall, maybe she's sedentary most of her day, hardly any muscle mass and so on, she might not get away with a lot of food all in all, and have to be a little bit more diligent. And unfortunately, that's not fair. That is, the cards that we have been dealt, but the same can be said for a lot of the financial things initially too. It's not fair where we're born or what educational level we have, or so we just need to make the most out of what we've got there. But yeah, I think with anything, of course, you can put in your own research and work. But as you would know, as your listeners would know, when it comes to other performance things, also having a coach or having guidance, having it, and I'm not saying everyone needs to have a nutrition coach, but just surrounding yourself with other people that have similar goals, that are also active, that perhaps talk about nutrition, maybe curating your social media content a little bit towards learning more about nutrition, listening to podcasts like this and other nutrition podcasts from time to time also helps because, as we know, what we allow to come into our mind is going to have a direct effect on how you act later on in the day. So if you listen to something motivational that also includes a little bit of nutrition information in the morning, you're probably going to choose something different than the whipped mocha and muffin. that you would otherwise. But yeah, to your point of habits, I mean, so much in nutrition is so habit based, especially if we have a stressful life. We just resort to the same things over and over again. And I think that's actually a great thing, because if we get it dialed in, it can be super simple. And again, the research actually backs this up, that most of the people that successfully keep weight off, they eat similar things on a regular basis, like most of the time. They don't necessarily just think like, oh, what am I craving right now? Oh, well, I guess I'm going to go through this drive through. And oh, what am I craving right now? Well, I'm going to make myself a lasagna with some cheesy bread. Or so they're just like, okay, I'm busy. I've already got my dinner planned. I'm gonna get this and that, or I'm gonna get from Chipotle what the burrito bowl I usually get, and set and done. So once we establish 2-3 go-to breakfast options, 2-3 lunch options, maybe keeping a little bit more flexibility for a nice family dinner, having 2-3 go-to options when it comes to meals out when you're super busy, you're actually set up in a good way. But you do need to figure that out first, to actually fine tune things. And again, like very, very many correlations there to your training. Once you've got a good training routine dialed in, there's not necessarily a reason to change that up every week or every 2 weeks. It's fine to keep going with it for a little bit, and then from time to time add some variables in there.
A lot of what you allude to sort of makes me think about like the motivation people have to to make changes. Like I think of, and I don't know if it's good of me to think like this, but I think so of a lot of the cricketers that I work with, especially younger athletes, and they maybe carry a little bit of extra weight, and then eating that ice cream, or eating the thing that they're not supposed to be eating. And maybe it isn't ice cream, maybe it's something else, like it's neither here nor there, or maybe they just eat what their parents give them. But maybe they have a bit of potential as an athlete, and so this could like hold them back in some way, and so there's a huge part around sort of the motivation component, like what motivates people to either make these changes in their lives. What have you found as, I don't know if it's the best question, but like what are some of the things that motivate people to more stay on track with something like this, and what are some of the more shallower motivations that people maybe pursue? And just by way of explanation, like I hate exercise, I hate doing physical exercise, like it's not something I enjoy, but I'm motivated to do it because of my sort of past and my history with some back injury that I've sort of just carried with me in my lower back. And whenever I exercise, the pain goes away.
Amazing.
So I don't exercise because I feel like I want to exercise, because I want to stand in front of a mirror and look all dapper. Although that is nice too, but my motivation is to sort of not live a life with pain. And
Love it.
so yeah,
Yeah.
maybe like what's your thoughts on that from a nutrition point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're touching on one of the main reasons why people yo-yo diet and gain the weight back, because on average, we're actually great at losing weight. Like 90% of people have successfully lost weight. Unfortunately, almost the same percentage, 85% or so, are gaining the same weight back, and usually some on top of that. And that is for various reasons, especially often because, to your point, they don't have a strong enough why. It's just kind of like, I'm dieting for my wedding, I'm dieting for this vacation, I'm dieting for the summer. And then it's just this short-term mindset where we're not adapting a new identity that we talked about earlier, where we're just like, this is a short-term solution. And part of the reason for that is that our culture simply feeds us that. Like most of the time, we automatically assume and hear that, oh, it's totally normal to gain weight over the holidays, it's totally normal to be in this loop and just to crash diet, to go on a 6 week super challenge. And of course, the thing that's motivating about these aggressive diets is that you see the result. So comparing that to like your back pain going away very quickly. Whereas if we do something that's more moderate, more sustainable, healthier, it might take a little bit longer to see those same results. And so if we don't have a long-term mindset, mindset in the sense of how do I want to look in 10 years as opposed to just in 10 weeks time or in 20 years or so, and how do I want to feel when I'm 60 or 70, not just when, in 6 months or so. Unfortunately, that is often a reason why we're not choosing the moderate route and we're going with the more aggressive thing that looks more enticing, where people might also be able to market it in a better way. For instance, if you have a 6-week challenge thing and you see all these amazing before and afters, but they never show how does that person look like 6 months later or even 6 years later, because they might look even bigger than before because it was way too aggressive. And that's actually often something that I do hear when people start working with us, and I ask them, hey, have you recorded your food before? Have you used a food tracker or something like that? And some people say, yeah, I did. I used, I don't know, whatever, my Fitness Pal or something like that. But it didn't work for me. And when I dig a little bit deeper, often the reason is that these trackers often give you a goal that is way too aggressive and doesn't take protein into account. So, for instance, if someone's maintenance calories, so just the amount of calories that they need to maintain their weight, would be 2,000 or so, and then they enter as a goal, oh, I want to lose weight. And then this automatic machine there gives you a goal of 1,200. That's a 40% calorie cut. Nobody could sustain that for forever, and shouldn't, for sure, because that would not be good for your metabolism or your hormones. So oftentimes the approach is just wrong. And sometimes even if we don't track calories and we just completely cut out a food group, oh, I'm never eating bread again, I'm never eating carbs altogether, how sustainable is that? So what I like to encourage people to think of is, okay, give yourself more time than you thought that you need. If you want to look good in 6 weeks, make that 6 months. Set your goal for 6 months, and think of something that allows you, or an approach that allows you to fit in social engagements, that allows you to go on date night with your partner once a week, that allows you to fit in a vacation in there and learn how to work that nutrition around your lifestyle, and not putting your entire life on hold, telling your friends, oh, I can't eat out because I'm doing this challenge, because that sets you up to fail. And I mean, the comment that I just said, I can't eat out because I'm on this diet, or I'm doing this challenge, that's already coming with a very negative connotation. So oftentimes it's also those limiting beliefs and that negative self-talk that plays into that even more and holds us back even more, or causes us to regain the weight, because we're just pretty much self-sabotaging, and again, giving ourselves a little bit of a way out already. If we're saying weight loss is hard, everybody in my family is overweight, it's just kind of like almost impossible for all of us to lose weight. I'm going through menopause, it's very difficult to, or it's impossible to lose weight throughout that time. I'm a busy student in college, I have no money to eat well, it's going to be impossible to do that. By all these things that we're telling ourselves consciously or subconsciously, we're tripping ourselves up and essentially preventing ourselves from becoming that higher version. So again, going back to awareness, as soon as we are more aware of that negative language that we're using, or maybe limiting beliefs that we might hold, we can work on rewriting them. And that's not something that happens overnight, because that belief didn't come into existence overnight. Quite often, especially with women, I see that they were watching their moms diet all their childhood long. So that's what they grew up with for like 20 years. They saw their mom going through various yo-yo diets, picking their bodies apart, talking negatively about their body. And so that's what's ingrained in their brain. But then once we've become aware of it, the first step usually is just inserting a pause. So not judging yourself for thinking in that way, or telling yourself like, oh, Lisa, why did you say that to yourself again or so? But simply like, okay, I just said that. Okay. And maybe then working on how can I frame that in a positive way, that even if it doesn't feel like it's authentic yet, or like it's true, that you can step into that. So for instance, in the sense of weight loss is really hard, or losing weight is really hard, is no fun. Okay, I just said that to myself, or I thought that. Well, maybe I can reframe that in the sense, in the past, I wasn't successful at weight loss, at losing weight, but now I have a different approach, and it's absolutely possible. It was sometimes what can help is if we look at people that have successfully achieved what we want to achieve, and not looking at them as like the outliers anymore, but thinking if they have achieved that, it's possible for me too. And I mean, in performance of any sorts, that's also super, super helpful, looking at the people of that have what you have financially or have achieved a certain athletic goal, and like what have they done to get there, kind of copying that, and just thinking of this is the norm now. I'm not looking at all the 95 other percent of people who have failed, but this is showing me what's possible.
Yeah, I love everything that you spoke about there. I think it's a, you know, I mean, I've had a lot of mental performance conversations on the podcast because that's something that really interests me. I'm a mental performance coach myself. Um, and so everything that you spoke about there speaks directly to the things that we speak in those conversations often, right? And it just shows that how if the mindset is in place, like you said, like if there's a big enough why, right? If the motivation, if the inner game is in place, then doing the outer game just becomes so much easier. And in particular, I like the examples you gave about, because I was, in my own life, we went through this, my wife and I, when we would have to go out to people and it's like, okay, we're going to go, but, and the South African braai, we spoke about that a little bit earlier. Okay, we're going to go to a braai. Now, what are we going to braai? Because we can't do the meat anymore. And so we've gone through all of those things. Fortunately, we had family, we weren't, in our own family, we weren't really ridiculed in any way for making sort of a big diet change like that. We were, we were supported for the most part and accommodated. And all of a sudden, mom-in-law learns to make, and my mom learns to make food that they would never have made. Just in order for you to be sort of still welcome and feel welcome. So we were supported really well.
Yeah,
Um,
I want to add a couple of things to this. So I mean, I love that you did the change with your wife. That just makes things a lot easier, to my previous point of like community and your environment. So as someone who's listening to this and who is struggling, like try to find someone. There's tons of online groups for whatever you want to achieve these days that are probably free. Maybe you can find a friend or anything like that who does what you want to do together, just for extra accountability. And I mean, it is wonderful that you receive that support, but I do want to say that we can't expect other people to change with us. I think that's sometimes a mistake that we make, where we're like, oh, they were still like, my partner still brought home pizza even though he knows I'm on a diet. I'm like, okay, yes, that doesn't make it easier. I get that. But maybe have that conversation with them. Like, first of all, why you want to change. And by no means, like, you cannot get other people to change with you. I'm sure that you as a vegan know that, like, if other people want to make a change, they're gonna. And the best way you can help them is by being an example and not judging them, not talking down for what they're doing. Because if you suddenly sat at a table and you were like, ugh, put that meat away, I don't want to see that, this is disgusting, what are you input, like, that's not a nice way to help people to change. But if you just sit there, you eat your wonderful meal and you enjoy it, and someone's like, oh, why did you make a change, Jody? I'm curious. And you're like, well, I feel a little bit lighter, and actually also read an article. If you're interested, I can send it to you. Is a very, very different approach, and it comes from a loving place. So I just want to say, like, if someone wants to make a change, don't expect other people to support you. You cannot do that, and you don't expect them to change with you. And the third thing I wanted to add to that is that sometimes when we make a change, and I guess in your case it probably was a little bit different, but in many cases people make too many changes, too big of a change too quickly. So in most cases it's a little bit more of like, find something small, a first small step or so that you can do continuously and stick with, and prove to yourself that you have the ability to change in that way, than throwing your entire life overboard and expecting that you are able to stick with that. Because as soon as life comes, and it always does, there's always going to be a stressor, there's always going to be a setback, you're going to completely resort back to your previous way and abandon that new thing. As opposed to, if it's just something small, let's just say you want to start working out, and you have committed to 3 times a week 30 minutes. That's a lot easier to stick with in a busy period of time than if you're suddenly saying from one moment to another, I'm going to go to the gym 6 times a week and work out for an hour and a half. Or on the diet front, if you're suddenly saying, I'm never ever eating sugar again, that's also very unrealistic. Whereas if you're just saying, okay, I'm going to clean up my breakfast a little bit, include a bit more protein in there, not having any processed sugar in there, and just add a bit more fruit. That's something very easy to stick with for a couple of weeks, and then you can build on that. So I think small steps go a lot further long term and help us adapt a long term mindset than if we're just from one day to another trying to change everything. And sometimes a radical change is necessary, totally. But I would say, even amongst, I'm curious about your own personal experience there actually, but even amongst the people that have transitioned to a vegan or plant-based diet that I have known, it was often easier to make it more gradual, also for the digestive system, because of course you need to get used to a bit more fiber and everything else, than just saying like, okay, we're cleaning out the house completely and never putting anything else, any animal products. So sometimes maybe go in vegetarian for a week or two, and then from that transitioning over to veganism can work better. But yeah, I'm curious how you went about your transition.
So how it went about was my wife went stone cold. Sort of, she just said, "Right, I'm done with this." And I think she was driven more with health as well as the moral stance behind it. So she had sort of both of those motivations. Where at that time, the moral stance wasn't so important to me. Don't get me wrong, I love animals, but it wasn't something that drove me to sort of think about changing my diet at the time. And so I think initially, for about 6 months, the only animal products I ate was chicken. I cut everything out: cheese, milk. I had no problem cutting any of that stuff out, but I was like, nah, I don't know if I can leave chicken. So I think I ate chicken for about another 6 months. And then sort of after 6 months, I was like, oh, okay, there's actually no point, you know? And since then, I mean, I still feel like we're still on a journey. It's still trying to find the balance with certain things, even though it's been 10 years. So everything you've spoken about earlier about being the unhealthy vegan, I think we've sort of gone that way a little bit, where it was bread and pasta and these sort of things. And then, you know, we're sort of in a place now where it's not like we don't eat that, but maybe once every second week we'll have a little bit of bread, you
There you
know.
go. Yeah, love it.
But it's certainly not an everyday thing. But there was a time when it was.
Hmm.
Um, and my thinking normally around sort of making any dietary changes is that it takes a very long time. It's not something that you can do overnight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I still get cravings for like old South African food. Like
Right.
there'd be times. I was a big lover of a South African boerewors roll, you know, which is like a sausage bride and then in a bun. I still get that.
Well, and I think this is actually like a beautiful point, because food is so much more than just nourishment, or like we sometimes think of ourselves like, why can't I be more robotic about this? But food is cultural, it's emotional. We've already touched on that, and it's part of your upbringing. Like, not for no reason do we also call certain things comfort food, or like you smell a certain thing, you're like, purported back to when you were 5 years old and your mom was cooking something or like making your birthday cake, and you're like, oh, this is amazing, and another person has no connection to that. So like, I think that sometimes the danger of like reading certain things, or just trying to follow someone blindly, like on that you see on Instagram or whatever, and they make something look very easy, which might be easy for them but very different for you. So I think the beautiful thing about nutrition is also that we can and should personalize things more, and just listen more to like what feels good to you. Like that totally applies to things like intermittent fasting, or again, as I was saying, like higher fat or higher carbs. What's better? It really depends. It depends on also how much your digestion works, or it depends, are you a man or a woman? There's certainly differences there often in terms of personal preference. So I think, if we look at ourselves a little bit more as guinea pigs in a good way, and just allowing ourselves to be curious and be more mindful about like, what does something actually make me feel, or how does something make me feel? And then assessing that, creating that awareness, maybe keeping a tracker where you're like, okay, when I ate more vegetables for 2 weeks, I went to the bathroom more regularly, I wasn't craving as much in the afternoon. Or on the negative side, like when I had coffee on an empty stomach and didn't eat until noon, I felt super anxious, and it actually made me hungrier later on in the day. Like, that's all data that you can work with later on, and that gives you an indication of like, maybe intermittent fasting is for you, or maybe it isn't, or maybe this is for you and isn't. So yeah, more curiosity, more awareness. I think that's certainly something that helps with nutrition as well.
Yeah, I think you've given us such great advice and sort of shared many insights that I'm hoping people who listen to this will sort of take to heart, right? My maybe final little part that I just want to explore with you is I think of food sometimes just as fuel. And so if we think of it from an athlete's perspective, many athletes don't always have the who I need to lose weight problem, right? They because they expend quite a lot of energy, etc., etc. They're normally pretty well built, um, but there's still a component around what can athletes be mindful of in terms of their fuel. You know, like how do we need to think of food and maybe different types of food in terms of how that fuels us when it comes to say something like sports performance.
Yeah, love it. So I think it obviously very much depends on what kind of sport. Are we talking about endurance? Are we talking about explosive, or in more short duration times sport? And it depends on how long is that bout of exercise. But overall speaking, I think a theme for both camps is kind of, we want to fuel and refuel our performance obviously well. And so before and after that pre and post workout meal should almost always be easily absorbed by your body. So if during those times we're thinking more in the sense of simple carbs combined with some protein, or if you're more fat adapted, fats that are more easily absorbed, it really depends, but something that's easily absorbed. So those are not the times where we're wanting to have a ton of especially raw vegetables or a ton of fiber. If you space that more to the other meals, so for instance, if let's just say if your workout is, or your exercise bout, your performance is in the afternoon, you're training after work, or you have a competition kind of more in the evening, I would try to get more of my fiber in my breakfast, in my lunch. So berries, oats, that kind of stuff in the morning with some protein in there, and your lunch, maybe some beans and broccoli, and again, something that's a bit harder to digest. And then your pre-workout meal in the afternoon, more something like a banana and a protein shake as kind of like a lighter snack, or rice cakes and some cottage cheese or so as a pre-workout snack. Then doing your exercise, making sure you're hydrating properly throughout with some electrolytes. If it's a longer work bout, then maybe including some refueling, a little bit more carbs throughout your training bout or performance bout. And then in your dinner, you want to have something that's super easily, super quickly absorbed. So maybe some rice with some chicken or tofu in your case, or something like that, and vegetables that are cooked and more easily digested. So spinach, or tomatoes, or bell peppers, or something like that is a great post-workout meal. And while we don't have to necessarily worry about a quote unquote window of gains, or like, oh, you need to eat or drink something within half an hour, otherwise you're not recovering so well, we do want to refuel within, I would usually say, like an hour or two, and not so much, yes, for the physiological perspective as well, like you want to replenish your glycogen stores, you want to help your muscles grow or your connective tissue to be recovered. But for me, it's more from hormonal standpoint. So any stressor that we have, whether that is emotional or at work, or a training stressor, is going to bring up our cortisol. And that's actually a good thing, because that means our body wants to adapt to that and is going to sort of super compensate for where we're at. So like it's going to get better. But the adaptation, the recovery mostly happens after training. So it's not actually during training that you're starting to recover, it's afterwards or after your competition. And one of the best ways to bring down cortisol, to bring down or to initiate the recovery process is actually by eating something. Anything is going to, any kind of food coming in is going to bring down cortisol because it means insulin goes up. Carbs do that even more so than fat and protein. So that's why often when we're super stressed, we're actually craving more carbs because it's going to help us blunt that cortisol more. So that is the main reason that I usually say we should eat something sooner rather than later after training. But yeah, the main takeaways for me would be aside from the timing point, make it something that's easily absorbable and keep your fibers meals or your harder to digest foods to the other parts of the day, and also making sure you're rehydrating. I do think that especially for athletes, for people that want to perform well, supplements can help quite a bit. I mean, whole food should always provide the basis, but things like creatine, things like omega-3 to help with your inflammation, magnesium, vitamin D for people that are plant-based, maybe also some B vitamins in most cases, vitamin B12 in particular. We're looking into, do we need a supplement with calcium in your case as well, since you're not consuming any dairy? So just creating that awareness around what could be optimized even more, I think is really helpful.
This conversation is, I think we've really just scratched the surface, I think, with a lot of these things, right? And I'm hoping that when people have listened to this, at least if there's a need for them, that they can sort of get a sense that there's a bit of a starting point. And, there's certainly more things, right? Even just in your last little sentence there, I'm thinking, Joch, there's probably more questions I could ask you to try and get into these things. We haven't even really gotten into the hormones and those sort of things and how that's affected. But I'm sort of mindful of our time, and maybe we must set up another conversation, and we can get into all of that.
Absolutely love that. I do hope
Yeah,
that people have some practical takeaways from this. And yeah, the first and most important thing would just be like creating awareness, focusing on whole foods, and then sort of building on your goal, whatever particular goal you might have through those means.
yeah, yeah. Thank you very much, Lisa, for your time. If people sort of listen to us, yeah, and they want to connect with you or they're keen to reach out, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on, Jody. This has been a really fun conversation. So my company name is Nutrition Coaching and Life. Very easy to remember. That's the website, same handle on Instagram or YouTube or LinkedIn as well. And I also have a podcast, which is the Nutrition and Life podcast.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
My absolute pleasure.
Cool. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Likewise.
Brilliant.